Manitowish Waters Historical Society presents A Visit with John Michaelis, Cameraman and Moderator by Jim Robinson, October 6, 2014. In 2021, Manitowish Waters Historical Society benefactors have generously funded interns who will record about 24 historic videos from Kohler Library. Community members like Jim Robinson created these early videos that are available on our YouTube channel. Please take time and explore each of these timeless gems. We hope you enjoy the video.
My name is John Michaelis. I was born in Oak Park, Illinois on September 1st, 1930. In Oak Park, Illinois. We lived in Berwyn, Illinois until I was 7 years old, and then actually we lived with my mother's folks, and we were upstairs of what they call a two-flat. My folks decided that they were going to buy their own home, which they did in Elmwood Park, Illinois, and we moved in July of 1937. I didn't get in on that, being only 7 years old. My dad rented a cottage up in Fox Lake, Illinois, for a month, and we two boys and his mother, my grandmother on his side, went up there, and we stayed while my folks did all the moving from the two-flat in Berwyn to Elmwood Park, Illinois. Now, the one notable thing that was the big news when we were up there in Fox Lake, Illinois, was that Amelia Earhart disappeared. And so that was the every day it was on the radio what happened to Amelia Earhart, and of course there was all kinds of speculation more after that the Japanese had captured her, and that she hadn't crashed with Noonan, and of course nobody's ever found out for sure what did happen to her. But at any rate, when we made the move, and then we were in Elmwood Park, and it's a nice little bungalow, and my dad did all kinds of landscaping and putting trees in there and all that sort of thing, and he had an automobile repair business in Oak Park, Illinois, and he had this barber that he went to that came up here, and he fished, and he said, "Ernie, if you want a great place to fish, you got to go up to Manitowish Waters, Wisconsin." So that's how he came up here. He used to go over the Mississippi River, and when the walleye run was on in the springtime, but we went over there one time, and we had water from here to La Crosse, so he came up here and he tried it, and he loved it. He loved the country the minute he saw it. Mr. Ted Hedger, who was the barber, he stayed at Williamson's Resort, which is now Tellefson's Lorwood, but he said to my dad, "It's a little bit gamey over there. The two Williamson brothers didn't take very good care of the place," and he says, "You have a family," so he said, "I would suggest that you go to Bazos Hillcrest Resort," which is where we did. Upon staying at the Bazos, which was a very nice resort, now I've got to say that Mrs. Tellefson has taken a very good care of the resort. She's brought it up to date, so it's not a joint anymore like it was back in Williamson's day. Well, anyway, when we were going back and forth to Bazos Resort, my dad said to George Bazo, he said, "Is there any land that would be available up in this country or near your my dad liked it on the river where the Baz's resort is. And so George says, well, yeah, there's this piece that you go by on the road into me. He says there's the state land where the grade school is, but about halfway in, he says it stops being the state land and it belongs to a man by the name of Plunkett, who lives up. Was a surveyor. He was in this country for practically from the birth of Christ. But anyway, he said he owns it, and perhaps he would be willing to sell it to you. So my dad said, okay. Well, the funny part of it is George had no idea, and he said to my dad later, he said, I had no idea that Plunkett would sell you the land. But he went up there. Mr. Plunkett took a liking to my dad, and he said, "Do you like the fact that my dad had two boys and he was going to build a resort?" So he sold him some of the land that we own today. I don't know if it's telling tales out of school, and because they sure have caught up with it in valuation. But my dad paid $7,500 for it. And we've got 1,500 feet on the river, and so he said, I think he got a good buy. Outside of that, then my dad decided this was 1948, I don't know if I said that, but at any rate, he decided to quit his automobile repair business. The war was over, and it was no longer lucrative to be repairing cars. Everybody had war money, and they were buying automobiles, and they weren't paying for motor overhauls and everything else. So it lost the fact that it was worth making a lot of money, or some money with it. So anyway, my dad sold his garage, and in May of 1948 we moved up here. I was still in high school. They moved. I finished high school down in Illinois, and then we moved up for good after I graduated high school. And for the next year and a half, till from in the late fall 1948 to 1950, we built a resort with 6 cabins. The first building was the utility house, our big utility house, which I didn't get in on building. I was still in school. They were building that well. And then when we came up to the Northwoods, I did for good, that's when we started on our 6 cabins. It was all land we had to clear by ourselves. We didn't have, we bought a little tractor, which helped like heck. We never would have done it without the little tractor. But anyway, we got the 6 cabins built, and in 1950 we opened for our very first year. The first bunch of people we had were a graduating class from the Door County Normal School, teacher school in Door County, and my wife and I have gone there a number of times since. And at the time, little Ellison Bay and Egg Harbor and Ephraim and all those towns meant nothing to me, but these kids came from there, and those were our first customers, and they took all of our 6 cabins with their graduating class, and they all had a heck of a good time, and that was the start of our resort. I guess you cut. Okay, we're in 1951, and which was our second year in business. Okay, now the Korean War came along, and I was going to be drafted. That's what happened in those days, which happened in October. Now, in the meantime, earlier that summer, in August, a couple with their 2 kids came up to our resort, and there was going back just a minute, there was a lady on the Manitowish River below the dam. They had built a small resort, and her mother, they had a little hamburger place. It was Tishy's Knotty Pine. I think Huskies ended up buying the property, then Granny Virgin or whatever after that. But at any rate, they had some cabins, and they also had a little hamburger place. But the lady's mother, they were Bohemian folks, as my mother was, and Mrs. Tishy, the Grandma Tishy, did some roast pork and dumplings and sauerkraut cooking on Sunday. So my brother and I went over there of a Sunday in the summertime, and this is 1951, and we had a delicious dinner, lunch actually, and we came back and I was full, and some folks pulled up that had rented the cabin, which we rented from Saturday to Saturday, but this was Sunday because the gentleman that in question was a beauty parlor operator, and he and his wife, that was their busiest day on Saturday. So they came up on Sunday, and they drove in, they got out of the car with their two kids, and one of the kids was a beautiful little 16-year-old girl, Mary Ann, who turned out to be my wife. It's lasted pretty long. And anyway, I thought I was content with my belly full of roast pork, and then I saw this little doll, and I was just smitten. It was love at first sight, and of course I didn't make any big deal of it because the kid was only 16 years old, and so anyway, we went and her brothers, I went in the service and went to basic training and went overseas, and her brother started writing me all fishing stuff and this and that, and then she started writing, and the next thing you know, she was doing all the writing, and she was sending me cookies, and my wife is an excellent baker. It's another whole hour telling you all about what pies she makes. Okay. So anyway, we were over there overseas one time, and this is getting a little ahead of my story, but it's worth telling at this time. And this lady, Mary Ann, was sending me cookies, and the guys are all enjoying them, and one of my buddies, a guy from Sergeant Adam Schick from Toledo, Ohio, said, boy, these are great cookies, and he says, I want to see what this gal looks like. And I said, oh, she's just a kid, Well, my mom had a gift shop, and the next year, which would be 1952, when the Stupliches, that's Mary Ann's maiden name, came up, and there was a picture that she had taken, that her folks had taken, of her in the gift shop, and she was just a very pretty, well-developed young lady at 16, and I kept saying to the roof, Adam Schick, that she was just a kid, and he saw this picture, and he said, she don't look like no kid to me, and so it turned out that that was the love of my life, and when I got back from Korea, we resumed there again. She was living in Illinois, but we saw each other. My brother and I went to work at the Barbara Green factory one winter before she and I got married, but I had already asked her to marry me. This was in 1953, I think. Let me think. Yeah, something like that. We got married in 1955 anyway. I think this is winter of 54 going into 54, 55, and then in November of 1955 we were wed. We had 4 children. Pat, that's our oldest daughter, our only daughter, and then we had Mike, and we had Bob, and then Tom was a caboose 10 years after Bob, which we thought we were done. I thought it was recreation, and she made a project out of it. So anyway, that's not her fault. Let's see, where should we go from? Yeah. All right, let's see. So, first of all, I'll touch on when I was in Korea, because this is going to help a little bit. They decided that some big general, I don't even remember who it was going to meet somewhere at some parade ground and back. And we were up online. We were looking all pretty crummy, and they decided that this new general that was coming in should be greeted by at least one man from every unit in the 2nd Division. This man was going to take over, so of course there's a lot of support groups and all, and there was a huge bunch of people that met out on this parade ground. And there we were, scruffy, and fatigues were, we needed everything real, but they gave us shiny helmet liners, and they gave us the light blue kerchiefs for the infantry colors, and so we were with our helmets and our scarves, we were sharper than all get out, but the rest of the 2 of us looked terrible. Okay, well, anyway, we went back to the company, and the Jeep drive, we were up online, we were on, the company was on Old Baldy. By this time I was in the mortar section, so I was back at a position called Easy Checkpoint, but at any rate, the Jeep driver that was driving us back, he said, "Oh, blinkety blank, they don't have any smoke down the road. The Chinese could see when we were traversing, going down this road," and so he said, "Well, I got to pick up so-and-so, some big officer, in a half hour. I got to deliver you guys." So he went hell-bent for election down the road, and we were flying down there. And I all of a sudden there was an explosion, and I thought he blew a tire. And we ended over in the rice paddy, and I ended up with some facial wounds. There was an artillery round that came in. And the Jeep driver and my buddy that went with me to this parade thing were both killed. Now, so you talk about being a lucky, lucky guy. And I had a little facial wound. I had one tooth shattered, and the chips were coming down for 6 months afterwards. I don't know how they just kept filtering through. Next thing you know, my gum would be sore again. There was another tooth shard that came down. So at any rate, this is going to help my veterans preference thing when we get to the post office part, so that's why I'm explaining all this. So anyway, we get back and get discharged from the service, and everything's going fine, although my wife and I were married in 1955, and we had 3 of our children pretty quickly, and in 1958, and my son Mike was just a few months old. Mr. Daniels, who was our postmaster, was involved with the state league officers. In fact, he was the president of the Wisconsin chapter of postmasters, and he was headed for a convention, I believe it was in Wisconsin Rapids. And he had 2 clerks, Mrs. Ellen Perkins, who was his main clerk, and Thelma Ginther, who was his substitute clerk when he had his Saturdays off, when his regular clerk, Ellen Perkins, wanted leave, or when Ted Daniels himself wanted leave, Mrs. Ginther would work. Well, when he was just ready to go on convention leave, because he was the president of the chapter, Mrs. Ginther dropped dead of a heart attack. So he needed somebody on an interim basis, and he, knowing that I was in the service, and I talked to him a number of times just doing business at the post office, he said, "Well, could I do this?" It was in the fall, and I was full of extra time, and I said, "Absolutely, I would." And so that's how I started with the post office, and in due time, we had to take a test. This was an emergency hire that he could do this, without right off the street, and the fact that I was a veteran probably helped, and so on and so forth. And let's face it, we weren't very busy in the post office. I didn't have to know a lot. Mrs. Perkins was a very knowledgeable lady. So, all right, then a few months after that, the government had a test. It was held in the old school, which is right close to where our road is, and I passed with flying colors, and I also had a veterans preference thing, plus the Purple Heart thing, and so I was the top on the list. And of course, Mr. Daniels, who I was already broken in, and he knew what he was getting, he picked me. He had picked one of the top 3, and that was me, and that's how I got started in the post office. You get right down to it, it was strictly luck. Everything happened. God bless Mrs. Ginther. She passed away at the right time for me, and everything just, it was a lifesaver for my wife and I. Like I say, 1958, we were starting in on a winter that was not going to have the odd jobs. The resort was closed, and money was going to be tight, and so those days the post office was a lot busier at Christmas time, and I got a few hours in, and Mrs. Perkins took leave in the spring to get her resort in shape, so I got more hours there, and it was a great deal. Just a sidelight, before I became the postmaster, Mr. Daniels had to, or not had to, but he was allowed to hire a janitor. So he asked me if I would want to be the janitor, and I said, well, sure. So I got 2 hours every other weekend on a Saturday afternoon to clean the post office, haul the paper over the big culvert that Cal Laporte had to burn the papers in, and bless. I got $5 for those 2 hours. That was a separate check that I got from the government for my janitorial work. Then Mr. Daniels decided to retire, and they sent in somebody to swear me in on temporary. Mrs. Perkins had said that she wanted no part of being any acting postmaster. She was very close to retiring herself, and she says, I don't want all those duties. I've got a resort. I've got enough hours that I put in that I don't need any more to do, or I don't want the job. So, okay, I was named the acting postmaster. As a little interesting sidelight of that, I said, well, now that I've been, to the man that swore me in, I said, now that I'm the acting postmaster, what do I do about the janitor? Because I said, Mr. Daniels always signed the slip that they sent in, so I got the check for the janitor. So I said, I can't really authorize myself to do it. I said, somebody might think that I just signed the paper and didn't do the work. And the guy had to mull that over. He said, I don't think I've ever had a postmaster and a janitor who was one and the same person. So he said, I think you better give up the janitor job. So I did, and it turned out that I ended up doing the janitor job anyway, but I didn't get paid for it. So, that's the way it went. So as time went on, and it did, and going again with Mr. Daniels, he was told before he retired that the place, the post office, I don't know, I should explain that first. It was across the street from where it is now. There's a little circle drive there, and Mr. Daniels owned that building. And he was told by the Postal Service prior to his retirement that he had to put a bathroom, had to put a toilet and a basin in there, because he had a lady clerk, and it was just something that should be done. Well, he didn't like that idea, but he did it anyway. And then when the lease was up, he decided that, okay, you guys are going to pay for it. And he upped the rent to, I have no idea what the rent was, but apparently it was way too much money, because a man came over from the real estate branch in St. Paul, and he was talking to Mr. Daniels, who wouldn't budge, and finally he said to me, he said, well, I can't get the old guy to budge a nickel. He said, is there any other place available? Well, I said the only place that I know of was across the street from our present location then, and it was in a building that the Hanson people owned from the Hanson hardware store. There was a tile shop in there before that when it first opened, and then after that it was the Patterson Lumber Company had their office in there. But then when they built the lumber company, they built the yard up first with the store and lumber, and Mr. Bud Fritz, who ran it for them, had to come running from across the street. Well, then they built their own office, so that place was empty. I said, that's the only place in town that I know of. Well, he went over there and looked at it, and he says, well, it's a little small, but he says, we're going to take it because it's only on a temporary basis. Well, folks, that was the day we moved was the day that the nation buried Lyndon Johnson, and we're still over at that location. So just the way the government works, not too swiftly. Okay. Okay. Well, now let's see. When we were, one of the memorable things when we were in the post office, of course, our town was growing, but uh, we were at the location, unlike the one across the street from where we are in the little curved driveway. And then I was at the 4th of July, just prior when the Laporte fire was, when lightning hit. It was just prior, and of course the store was stocked to the ears because our area was all touristy. There was many American Plan and housekeeping cabin resort. So, but the housekeeping cabins needed groceries. Cal had his store just loaded. The lightning struck. The store burned down, and that was the quietest summer. You'd think we had a station out in the Sahara or something. It was really dead. Harry did a land office business south of town, but our town, which was just starting to grow and become something, was a ghost town. It was just terrible. It was very tough to take, and it was a blow to us. I suppose Cal never got over it, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised. It probably helped kill his dad, and it was a dreadful experience for all of us. We got over it. We have a bustling little area now. We have the Pea Patch is that was started by Charlie P. Actually, he named it Charlie P. They named it. It was called the Winmar Resort. Before that, it was Winnie and Marie, Young and Zimmerman. There was two older ladies who owned it, and they were down there. They had a tavern, a liquor license, but they were closer down to the dam, down to the actual lake is where the location was. Charlie moved it up to the hill where it is now, and Cal told a story that he knew that the Winmar was the tavern. They had insulated between the joists with newspaper. So he told Charlie P., I don't know, maybe you know this story, that he would like to look and read all those old newspapers that dated back to the Winmar days when they did that, because his dad told him how that was done. And lo and behold, if Charlie P. didn't take and throw away and burn all the papers before Cal got a chance, and Cal was pretty heartsick about that, but that's the way it goes. So he moved it up the hill and ran it for a number of years before he retired and moved to Mississippi, where his Inez came from, his wife. They both passed on since, and then the Barry Hopkins and his wife Lisa Laporte. Laporte took over, and she's got a couple of sisters, and so anyway, they took it over, and to this day they run it. They got a thriving business. It's one of the liveliest places in town, and it's just a great Northwoods Tavern. Now we'll talk a little bit about the history of the town as I recall it. As I said, when we first moved up here, the Catholic Church didn't exist. It's on our road. Birch Hill Road is the junction, and Highway 51 is where the Catholic Church is, and it didn't exist. You had to go up to church. They had it in the town hall sometimes, and then they had it in the community building after that. But at any rate, when we first came up here, Dietz's gas station was owned by a man by the name of Art Ells. And when he bought it, Highway 51 went right around the corner and went right by his place. Now they talked about, and they did. They moved it so that Highway 51 used to go right through Manitowish Waters, and he said when they decided to bypass Manitowish Waters and make Highway 51 County W and go straight north of Mercer, about where the community church is now, Ardell's, who owned Dietz's gas station, said, "I'm ruined." Well, my dad, who had been in the automobile repair business, said, "No, Art, you're not ruined." He says, "You got a hot corner here." He says, "What you got to do," he says, is learn to grease cars. You got a grease rack there, and he says you got to learn to do a little maintenance where you can change over and put antifreeze in the wintertime. That's the way they did then. They had water in the summer, and then you put antifreeze in. He says you got to learn to change spark plugs, maybe set of points, that sort of thing. He says, and he says you'll thrive. You'll be fine. You won't even miss the highway. Well, that's exactly what happened. The gas station was across from the Tower Tea Room. The Tower Tea Room was actually was a bar. It was the Tower Bar. When we moved up there, it was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Garber and their two daughters. It was called the Tower Tea Room, or the Tower, because right behind it was a fire tower, and that it fit pretty good at that time. Now the Garbers sold it to let's see, was that Johnny Nichols?
Johnny Nichols.
Johnny Nichols was the first guy that bought it, but then it had a succession of owners. Chuck Sager was there with his wife Jo, and then it was Nick, who was did some Greek cooking. He had a heck of a nice restaurant there, and it just kind of progressed to, and it's a nice restaurant to this day.
Angler. The Angler.
The Angler is what it is. That's correct. I was coached there by my cameraman here. So then around the corner and up at Highway K and W was Johnny Macarone's gas station. He was a Texaco dealer, and he was on the, actually when you're heading up toward Winchester, he was on the left-hand side of the road. And his brother-in-law owned a tavern across the way. John Brakowski owned the tavern, which is now a very fancy supper club. And it wasn't very fancy back in those days, but it...
Log cabin.
It was a log cabin, that's correct. It was a log cabin with, again, probably stuffed with newspaper in between the logs that Cal didn't get a chance to read. Let's see, then there's Camp Jorn, and the forerunner of Camp Jorn was it was Camp Thunderbolt. It was a boys' camp, or girl. It was a summer camp, and the owner previous to Camp Jorn, which was owned by the Waukegan YMCA, was a gentleman by the name of Charlie Nash, who was the Nash automobile man. And my dad was very happy. He's fixed Nash cars. He worked in the service department for a Nash dealer in Oak Park called the Barrel Brothers. And one time at some convention or something, he had met Charlie Nash, and that was one of my dad's really, he thought a lot of that, because he said Charlie Nash was a fine old man, and then when Charlie passed away, and I guess he willed it to the Camp Jorn, and they made the nice place out of it that it is today. The Discovery Center was a boys' camp. It started, it was State House Lake, which is the name of the lake that it's on, was as we understand it, as a boys' camp. It was guys that got into a little trouble down in Milwaukee, Racine, Madison, wherever, and they were sent up to the summertime to straighten up and learn what it is to do a day's work. They put in a lot of roll dams and stuff like that, and fish cribs, and they did a lot of good work. So when that was abandoned by the state, I think the state probably cut their own throat with that particular project, just because they decided that instead of just boys that got in a little trouble, they should make it co-ed. Well, it went downhill faster than a toboggan after that, because that didn't work, because boys and girls being what boys and girls are, it got a little too fraternal. So that's the history of that. And then, see, we told you about the gas station.
Little boat.
What's that?
Little boat.
Little Bow. Okay, we can. When we first came up here, Emil Winnetka Sr. was the owner of Little Bohemia. Well, my mother used to live on the south side of Chicago, so she knew where his original place was when he was with the Hooties or whatever, which was at 18th and Blue Island in the city. In fact, I had been there, and my mother and dad a number of times. As I say, my mom was Bohemian, so roast pork dumplings and sauerkraut and roast duck and all that stuff with caraway in here. And she could speak Bohemian, and so could Emil, and he'd come over and shoot the breeze with her. And he had an old car that he always when the parade came to Milwaukee from Baraboo, the circus parade, he had his big car. I don't remember now. I think it was I don't know, it was a Cadillac, an old Lincoln, or a LaSalle or something. He had a special D20 license plate, and he had my dad tuned it up. He wouldn't let anybody else touch it. My dad had adjusted the carburetor a little bit until it hummed, and then while my dad was doing that, my mother and he were having a cup of coffee and shooting the breeze in Bohemian. So that's an interesting story too. And my mom and they would exchange Bohemian greetings and hug each other when we went over there. And my dad didn't understand what was going on, and it was all fine. But anyway, let's see what. Now we'll. When we first came up, as I said, American Plan Resorts were the big deal. There was Voss's, which is still in existence, and across the bridge on well, I say this side, our side of the bridge, north of the bridge was a resort called Kerner's, and that's a bunch of homes and stuff. Now that was on the Spider Lake side, and on the Manitowish Lake side, he had a place called the Oval Bar. That's where his liquor license was. They had to wait until the dining room was closed because you could have a cocktail while you had your American Plan meal, and then when that was closed, then they could move the liquor license, had it in a little frame, and they moved the liquor license across the street, and then they opened the Oval Bar, across which is now the Blue Bayou, Rhea Mazur's Blue Bayou. It was several things before that. A man by the name of Henry Morgan had the Enchanted Cottage, and he looked like he had a nice American name, but he was more German than the Kaiser. It looked like all he needed was a spiked helmet. But anyway, he ran it, and then when he sold the Enchanted Cottage, he sold it to a gentleman by the name of Louis Berghoff, who had a place called Barnstormers. And he was related to the famous Berghoff restaurant in Chicago that served Lord knows how many beef sandwiches, and it was very famous for businessmen to go and have lunch at in downtown Chicago. Now, Louis Berghoff was a very shy type of person. He didn't seem like the kind of guy that would he didn't own the restaurant in Chicago, and he was very, very self-facing. He was a very, very calm, sweet guy. Wasn't outgoing at all. His wife was, and he had 2 children. And let's see. So let's see what other thing can we talk about when there's uptown. There was a hotel across the bridge from the Laporte store and from the Pea Patch. I don't recall what the name of that was. No.
Northern Lights.
Northern Lights. That's right, because there was a bar across there. That was another one. The Zigrays owned it when we first came up here, and they sold it to 2 young couples. And there was another case where Ida Zigray had to wait till the dining room was closed, and then she moved the license across the street and reopened, and that's was owned after that. After Mrs. Zigray owned it, it was owned by George Contouche, and
Annie Brunner.
And Ann Brunner ran it for a while, and Henry Voss called it Poor Henry's. He was Lloyd Voss's son, Henry. Of course, Lloyd Voss's parents, Henry and Ruth, are the ones that started Voss's Resorts. I can recall Mr. Voss, Henry, coming into the post office, and then in those days they got enough mail, both Laportes, both Kerners and Vosses and Deer Park, that Mr. Daniels would have a sack for each one of those 3 places, and Mr. Voss always disliked the fact that he had to come up for the mail. He says, "I started that resort, and now the women are in it, and I'm nothing but a blink-blank flunky." So anyway, that was that story, and Kerners did the same thing. They came up with the mail in the bag, but the biggest one that I recall, or the one that got the most mail, was Deer Park Lodge. Mr. Epstein took the resort over from his father-in-law, Maury Holtzman, who started, actually, Maury had a place in Eagle River, Eagle Waters Resort, and sort of set his son-in-law up in business over here in Manitowish Waters. And Mr. Epstein was very big on getting conventions into and he did a lot to establish and to spread the word about Manitowish Waters. He had, not coincidentally, my brother was into photography, and he had him take pictures, various views of the Deer Park Resort, and he had my brother order out postcards, which he, Mr. Epstein, proceeded to give to his guests free. In fact, he said, "You bring them back in, I'm going to run them through my postage meter and we'll send them out." So he had people that came in and to conventions, filled out the cards, of course. I did it free. He paid the postage, and it got the word around that Manitowish Waters existed. I think that he probably singularly had the most to do with getting the word of the town of Manitowish Waters around to people. A lot of people begrudged the fact that he sort of had a golden spoon in his mouth. Born with a golden spoon in his mouth. He had a lot of people didn't appreciate Mr. Epstein's lineage, but I do personally think that as one individual, to help the growth of the town or get the word out that we existed, was up to him. Okay. Well, actually, you get down to it, and I think probably Ben Epstein's bringing the area to the public's attention probably was a catch-22. There was a number of nice restaurants, and which of course were accommodated quite a bit by the summer folks that came up for a week, or this was the time when they really felt like spending money. And so they go out to eat and splurge and do this and that. Another store in town was the Jaeger Resort Shop. They'd go in there and buy a lot of summer clothing and splurge in there. And then Tony Jaeger ended up selling it to Mrs. Winters. It was Winters Resort Shop, and then Mrs. Winters sold it to two local ladies, Mrs. Bev Trapp and Marcia Laporte, and it was the Clothes Tree, and so there was more money to be spent there. But the thing is, then so many people fell in love with our town, and they started asking the resorts if they couldn't lop off a little of their frontage first. Plus, the place got to be, and sell them a place to build a house, and then they built homes that were so fancy that the valuation of everything went up, and the resorts, you paid taxes by frontage, and they couldn't afford to hang on to the frontage because they only had seasonal businesses, so it ended up sort of being a catch-22, and that's why it was, we got converted from lots of restaurants and more of a, well, I won't say Wisconsin Dells, but the atmosphere was, in the summertime we were buzzing and we were busy and the restaurants were busy, but we were strictly seasonal. Then winter came and everything died. Well, then when the valuations went up and the houses got bigger, people couldn't afford the resorts, and since they closed the resorts, then fewer people came up, and the year-round homeowners didn't go out to eat and splurge as much as the summer people that came up for a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and so on and so forth. Now, we, for instance, at our resort had a gentleman who was in industrial chemicals in Milwaukee, and he sent his wife and 3 daughters up here, and they spent all summer in one of our cabins, which was great income for us. He had a territory uphill. Like I say, he sold industrial chemicals, so he hit so many of the paper mills up here. He had the Rhinelander paper mill. There was one over at Park Falls, and there was several of them in the area that he hit, and he'd come up here. He had a bunch of his cronies from both Park Falls and Rhinelander, and they had a shack over somewhere west of here on a trout stream. He was a very inveterate trout fisherman. He loved to fish, and it was an ideal situation for him. He had his kids up, but as people bought property things, valuations went up, and it changed. So we became no longer a tourist area, which people could no longer retain that property and pay those taxes on a seasonal basis, and we became more of a year-round, well, I won't say retirement, but big home area that people lived all year round, and the fact that they had kitchens and accommodations where they could do their own cooking. They didn't go out as much, so more of the restaurants went out of business. Like I say, it was a sort of a catch-22. The area has changed. I'm sure it's much for the better. People still love it. It's just a wonderful place to live. We're so happy that my wife and I were able to raise our 4 kids up here. They had a healthy environment. We didn't have to worry about them they ran out of the house in the morning and they came in at night a little bit scroungier, but they tired and exhausted and dirty, and they got a bath and put to bed, and they slept like logs, and it was just a marvelous place to raise children. Okay? Well, I still say this is a very, very wonderful place to live. People that say, how can you stay up there all that time? The winters are so long. Well, that's true. It is, and if it gets severely cold and it's 20 below for 10 days, 2 weeks at a time, that gets to be a drag, I will say. But it's a beautiful, beautiful place. It's calm, and we enjoy springtime. It's almost like fall. I don't mean weather-wise. I'm talking about the shades of green almost look as beautiful as the yellows and the golds and the reds and the browns and the greens in the fall, and it's just a delightful place to live, and you want it to continue to thrive, but you almost hope it doesn't thrive too much, because then we'll have too many people. I know there was a gentleman, Chuck Laporte. Of course, it was the lifeblood of the country and of our town when the resorts were going, that we had people up here, and he'd come into the post office and say, you can't even find a place to park in this GD town anymore because we got so many people. And of course, you'd have to have people to bring you money, because we can't print our own. That's not legal. So I guess that, as I mentioned before, it's a catch-22, but this is a delightful place to live. You go down our roads, and it's just wonderful. You see these, somebody has their own little sign, which a lot of times gets taken down, but it's amazing how you read the other side of the sign. It says, hurry back on the way out, or nice homey little things like that, or see you later, and it's just a warm place to be, and we love it, and I hope you see us too often, but don't push us out of business. Thank you. I have to add a little postscript as to my time in the post office, which I thank everybody for. I had a delightful time. Sometimes the bureaucrats and the guys in the office up ahead of me, I didn't care about what they thought, but I just thoroughly loved the people. They told me that they really missed me when I retired, and I missed them. Actually, if it was just for the people, I'd probably still be there. They'd have to carry me off the job, but that's the way it goes. I got one more anecdote. There was a gentleman who he's since deceased. If you go in the cemetery, I think on the backside of his grave, there's I told you I was sick, and so then you'll know who I'm talking about. It's a little mystery. I'll make you hunt up who this is. But anyway, he put a sign on. Actually, it said Michaelis. Now that I think about it, because I didn't know if as I'm starting to reflect on this, and I thought, well, you fool, you have the sign at home on one of your trees. That's what it is. But anyway, one night he came in after the post office was closed. It was in the summertime, because he had a ladder. He got up on the roof and he put this Michaelis sign up there. But we have a flat roof in the post office, and he used nails that were too long. They didn't poke down into the post office proper, but he didn't tar the nails. And when it rained or snowed in the springtime, it leaked. And so then we had water out in the lobby, and Ralph Hansen was a very unhappy lesser to the government because these nails were out. Well, he tore the sign down and gave it to me and tarred the holes, but well, we all had a good time. Thank you.